In the age of notation software, the amount of musicians and composers acquainted with basic rules pertaining to musical engraving diminishes daily. In this short video, I would like to discuss some simple rules pertaining to stems. Of course, these rules can be applied to handwritten music to improve their legibility, but also to more finicky notation software programs that sometimes mess these simple rules up, whether by default or via improper input by the user. I feel the need to address some of the basics pertaining to writing stems, as it is one of the quickest ways to identify poor orthography or engraving. I'm sure there are a myriad of other ones, but ugly and improperly placed stems really seem to jump off the page in my opinion. So firstly is stem direction. In general, stems go upwards when the note is below the middle staff line. This does not generally include the note written on the middle staff line, which should almost always have its stem go downwards. All notes written above the middle staff line should have their stems go downwards. The exception to this is in contrapuntal writing, when two or more voices are written on a single stave. In this case, the lower voice has its stem placed down, and the upper voice has its stem placed up. When a musical phrase oscillates or moves over the middle staff line, and the stems are connected with beams, the direction of the stems might present a quandary to the composer as to whether they go up or down. In this case, I rely on the advice of one of my teachers, which is to focus on the weight of the entire phrase. If the majority of notes, either in a scale or intervallic jump, are above or below the middle staff line, then you orient yourself towards whether the phrase is weighted more above or below the middle staff line, and adapt the beams accordingly. This same rule applies to the direction of stems for chords. If most of the notes or intervals of the chord lie above or below the middle staff line, this determines the direction of the stem. In some cases, this won't be clear, as some musical phrases, intervals, or chords are equally weighted above and below the middle staff line. In these cases, the choice is yours as to which direction appears more aesthetically pleasing and appears more legible. Next is something hardly ever discussed, and this is the length of stems. Here the best course of action is to imagine an interval of the octave between the note head and the bottom of the stem. In most cases, this method will give you the cleanest and most consistent stem length, and is easy to eyeball when writing by hand. However, there is an exception to this. Obviously, this rule no longer works when notes go further outside the stave. Therefore, once a high or low note goes beyond 2 ledger lines, it should have its stem extend down to the middle staff line by default. The reason for this is that only drawing an octave distance on higher notes or lower notes can create quite ugly and illegible results. This rule also applies to high or low musical phrases outside the stave with beams. The beam should touch or rest on the middle staff line. This allows for clear readability when lots of ledger lines are present. This now brings us to how long stems should be written when adding flags to them. In the case of 1 or 2 flags joined to the stem, the length should be the same as it is for normal notes, therefore an octave in length, unless, of course, the note is written beyond 2 ledger lines above or below the stave. For every additional flag added, the stem length increases by 2 staff degrees. Finally, this brings me to the proper notation of stems in 7th chord inversions in closed voicing. I certainly remember early in my own musical career being quite confused by how to notate 7th chord inversions correctly when doing so by hand, as no one had given me a simple explanation on how to do it. Because 7th chord inversions contain an interval of the second, one note is always placed on the other side of the stem. The question as to which note to place on the other side of the stem might seem difficult to answer, or perhaps not even of great importance at all. However, I would argue that staying true to standards is always best, and in the case of 7th chords, there is indeed a standard. It all comes down to how the interval of the second is written with a stem. There is in fact only one proper way of writing second, and it is done via the lower note of the second being written to the left of the stem, and the higher note being written to the right of the stem. Therefore, whenever the interval of the second appears in a seventh chord inversion, it should be written in the same exact fashion, with the lowest note to the left of the stem and the highest note of the interval of the second to the right of the stem, and the rest of the notes of the seventh chord are then written to the left of the stem if the stem is going upwards, and the rest of the notes are written to the right of the stem if the stem is going downwards. This rule of thumb will help you anytime you run into a seventh chord inversion, or in fact, any chord or harmony that has one or more intervals of the second in it. There are of course many more nuanced rules, especially when it comes to contrapuntal writing or unisons, but I wanted to keep this video as a short introduction to these topics, and hope these few rules of thumb pertaining to how one writes stems will help you improve the appearance of your own compositions, or maybe simply improve the legibility of your own music theory homework. And if you're interested in learning more about harmony in a ground-up fashion, consider becoming a channel member for exclusive lessons.